What is going on, y'all? KMBest here, your favorite 69th ranked Marvel Snapper. Let's talk about the best decks to climb in Marvel Snap. We're going to start with Invisible Woman First Steps, and this is the current list that I consider the best list of Invisible Woman First Steps. There is a flex spot in this Mobius M. Mobius, but largely what this deck is trying to do is be the Invisible Woman First Steps deck that fuses best with being a Juggernaut Negasonic priority-based mid-range deck, which means that this deck has not only effectively a combo endgame style with the multiple Invisible Woman Prodigy line, but it also has a very strong, straightforward, mid-range, take a lane, play a Juggernaut style of deck. The downside of playing a deck like this is it is probably the most targeted deck in the game. And I do think that there is something to be said for this specific build in the world where things are targeting you. But if you really are afraid of things like Supergiant, you can get a Cosmo in here that can help you a lot as well. There's really just a lot to be said for the flexibility and power of the Invisible Woman First Step shell, and I think that that is largely what is being drawn on here with this list. Detonator, a member of my Discord, finished second in the Golden Gauntlet with this exact list that he got from one of my videos. It is absolutely a monstrous and powerful thing to be doing right now, and frankly, I consider it the best deck in the game at the moment. Can't talk about the Golden Gauntlet without talking about the winner. This is the list that won the Golden Gauntlet in the hands of Fox. This is an extremely interesting list that I consider super compelling. There are a couple of really interesting things going on here. The first one is this is a Mercury Cannonball list that is looking to blow up Invisible Women with that Mercury Cannonball on 5. Being able to hard target that is very, very common because you are very often going to be ahead as the Mercury Cannonball gamer going into turn 5 if there is an Invisible Woman on the board. And even if you don't have the Mercury, your Cannonball can prevent the doubled Invisible Woman strategy from happening anyway with priority because it moves it and gets rid of the potential for a Prodigy to show up behind her. That is part of what this deck is doing. The other part of what this deck is doing is being an ELEKTRA deck. And I know not a lot of people listened when I talked about how powerful ELEKTRA was and what a minimal effort inclusion it can be in so many different decks. Here we have ELEKTRA in this deck, and I will not overstate it. ELEKTRA literally won this deck the Golden Gauntlet. The threat of that card determined how the final game of the finals would go. ELEKTRA very literally was the difference between this deck winning and losing the Golden Gauntlet qualifier that just happened last night / this morning. This is a genuinely powerful deck that is also looking to take advantage of a couple of other things. Two things to note here. First, this is a deck that really thrives because there is a lack of Enchantress. There is currently a lack of Enchantress because people are playing a lot of Stardust where they would otherwise potentially be playing Enchantress as a big body 4-cost tech card. I expect that to change in the future. A lot of that is just a new card released. There is a second thing here going on, though. That is, if you have a Moonstone in a Mercury lane, you can move the Moonstone. And in a deck like this, where Moonstone represents like 20 power every lane that she actually goes into, you will be able to redistribute your power late into the game as long as there isn't a Moonstone in a Mercury lane as much as you want. And that is a really powerful dynamic as well. Now, keep in mind, once it moves, it will not retain the ability to move. The Mercury will no longer be in the same lane, etc., etc. And it is worded in such a way, because Moonstone is only supposed to copy the ongoing abilities, that does imply that that's a little bit weird, but it does work, and it is a thing that is quite powerful right now. I think one of the more interesting metagame developments recently has been the addition of Supergiant to the meta in Force in a way that is specifically targeted at beating the Invisible Woman First Steps decks, and I think that that is a reasonable thing to try to do because I do think those are the best decks in the game, and that's a very, very good reason to play a deck if you think it beats the best deck in the game. And I think that there is a very coherent argument that this kind of stuff just does win the matchup pretty consistently. The interactions between Supergiant and end of turn stuff basically always favor the Supergiant. End of game is after end of turn. So anything that was under a Supergiant will get 0 end of turns. That's to say nothing of like Thena, for example. Athena doesn't even see the cards under a Supergiant as played that turn. There's just a lot of negative interactions here. I didn't even mention how it can delay things like Shadow King to actually enable them to hit something big like a Havoc if they somehow got that down before the Supergiant. There's just a ton that makes this a favorable matchup for the Supergiant decks. But what the Supergiant decks lack is beef, its power, its stats. They don't have a lot of specifically large dudes in here. They are always relying on fairly minimal amounts of stats in order to win. And so if they're not pulling off their amazing snipes or their juggernauts or their negasonics or whatever, you are going to get outpowered a pretty decent amount of the time. Hand and tech is really interesting because I really would like to cut Shang-Chi from this list for a juggernaut at this point. I don't think Shang-Chi is hitting basically anything. I was shocked when I took a look at the preliminary Golden Gauntlet numbers, which as a caster, I saw a couple of the early stat sheets and saw that Shang-Chi was like the second most played card behind Mr. Fantastic. Again, this was pretty early on. I'm unclear on like these numbers weren't fully run, but it is shocking that Shang-Chi was played to that degree at all because I do not think that Shang-Chi is a very good card. And the only thing tricking me into keeping him in this deck is the Wolf package here and the fact that I just don't like being super dead. But like being real, Shang-Chi right now, very few good targets. Everything is end of turn or happening later or too small for him to hit. There just are not a lot of great hits. It's not to say he's an unplayable card, but we've had good Shang-Chi metas and we've had bad Shang-Chi metas, and we're definitely in one that I think is less than ideal for our boy. This, on the other hand, Victoria Hand actually, in my opinion, underperformed a little from expectations that I had set for it in the Golden Gauntlet. But I do think it is still one of the strongest decks in the game. It's just the kind of deck that is so much more likely to take you to 5-1 than it is to 6-0 because it is such a fair deck on the fundamentals. This deck is the fairest and most honest tech deck in the game. Good stats, good tech. It is never going to be a bad choice, but it is almost never going to be the best choice because all it is just some number distribution games, and you can win those a lot if you're the best player in the world, but it takes a lot for you to win every single game when you play something like this. On the other hand, the floor on this deck, I feel, is very, very high. You should have a reasonable win rate, basically no matter what, if you're playing a deck this consistent. Wanted to spotlight the Golden Gauntlet champion #1 Derek's list for this archetype. He's just been a big Moon Girl fan for a while, and I believe he did pretty well in GGQ1, which is the tournament that just happened, but I do know that he missed top 16. I believe he went 5-1, but this is a powerful, reasonable list that is looking to do a little bit more in terms of raw stats, a little bit higher on the high rolls in order to compete with the high rolls of other things in this metagame, like Invisible Woman First Steps, trying to go power to power. I don't want to talk about this deck, but I'm going to. Jimmy Dickens hit top 5 with this Clug list, which is modified off of Butt's original Galactus First Steps Clug list. It's good. Like, I don't really, there's not really much else to say about Clug right now other than it's quite good. Clug is a powerful archetype. And yes, you know, there are some things that move against it. The more Merlins other people are playing, the worse Clug gets. But right now, there's not a ton of Merlins. There's a lot of, like, very specific Invisible Woman stuff. And that matchup's not perfect, but it is pretty solid. And especially with the size that a Galactus First Steps can get to, there's some really powerful stuff to be done in this shell. There's not a lot of people who can interact with a magic right now. There's not a lot of people who can interact with your Clug right now. Once more people start playing Merlin, that's not great. It is very interesting to me how Merlin does serve as this sort of check on Clug decks existing long term, and he's also so good that they still want to play him. Clug is a powerful strategy right now. There are probably multiple builds that make sense as long as the basic macro strategy of clogging your opponent is what the goal is here. And I think that this is a very, very reasonable deck. And if you are looking for a deck to play Galactus First Steps in, I hate to break it to you, but this is by far the best. A lot of decks have been very straightforward so far, so let's talk about one that isn't so straightforward. This is Butt's Agamotto list, and I just love it. It does all the things that I love about Marvel Snap. It has all the cool cards that I love about Marvel Snap, and also Juggernaut, and it has so much ability to have hidden information and surprising range, which makes games both with and against it tense, exciting, and frankly, confusing. I think this deck does a lot to allow you to have very reasonable games in a consistent way that is also consistently inconsistent. This is a deck that almost, in my view, reminds me of Thanos Arishem in the sense that it's not always doing the same stupid thing every game. In fact, it's almost never doing the same stupid thing every game. But there's a bunch of different stupid things that are available to it as a game plan that I think allow it to be a powerful deck. I think this is a strong deck. I think it does strong stuff, and I think it asks a lot of you as a pilot to maneuver your way through the turns in the best possible way. You can make a mistake on turn 3 that really ends up snowballing into turn 6. That's real. That does happen. Agamotto's ability to consistently show up in metagames that don't seem particularly favorable to it is really notable. And I want to point out that a lot of the top players that I spoke to before Golden Gauntlet had an Agamotto deck in contention to bring. Not many of them decided to bring it, but to me, what that's representative of is that this space is relatively uncharted in this metagame, relatively unexplored, and probably could and should be explored more fruitfully. There is potential in this space, even in the Invisible Woman First Steps metagame. Secondary Galactus First Steps deck. This one comes from Rabbit Sweet. If you are interested in, and I get this question a lot, weirdly, what's the easiest deck to play? What's the easiest possible deck that I could choose to play? It's probably a Doom 2099 deck. This deck basically plays itself. In some cases, like Makari, it literally plays itself. There's a lot that can be said for playing a deck like this, and I think that one of the things that people over-index for is decks that have skill expression if they're not that good. I think, generally speaking, if you think two decks are roughly equal, you should play the one that is easier to play. Almost everyone, including me, should play the one that is easier to play. Skill expression is cool and awesome, but you're not going to play at the top of your game all the time. This is Marvel Snap. You're playing on the toilet sometimes. You need to play the deck that's easier, and I think that this is a deck that is remarkably easy to pilot with a legitimately good amount of points in it. It's just solid. Sizer doing extremely well in a Golden Gauntlet tournament with a move list, but for once, was not move bounce, and I feel pretty vindicated by that because I've been saying for a while that these versions of move are drastically superior to move bounce in the current environment, and so it's nice to see the move guy actually make the same determination. I believe that a lot of that is down to the power of Hellion, and frankly a lot of this deck is down to the Hellion Heimdall 1-2. This is a deck that really gets dramatically stronger when you draw that Hellion on 5. And you are able to do what it does. Because there are people playing Mercury, and you do have to be concerned about getting your lanes Mercuried before Hellion comes down, or on the turn Hellion comes down, and having that totally screw you over. But Hellion is a massive addition to this archetype that has allowed it to very reasonably create checkmate situations. It is extremely powerful. It is able to target lanes at will, and that is largely the thing that makes Hellion so strong. It's not just the additional procs, it's the fact that you can either leave them in the Hellion lane or Heimdall them to another lane, or you can leave them where they are, which allows this deck massive final turn flexibility that is an extremely powerful component of good Marvel Snap decks. Let's talk about some piles. One of the premier mid-range gamers in Marvel Snap, Chamo, got 4th in the Golden Gauntlet with this absolute pile of mid-rangey cards. It's the exact ideal of a Chamo deck. This guy loves playing stuff like this, and I appreciate that no matter what the meta is, stuff like this has maintained its ability to be functional, to be powerful, to be strong. It's a very reasonable and fair deck, and that is really the only thing you can say to insult it. This is a fair deck. A lot of things are not playing fair right now, and I think if you run into some of those more unfair things, you end up getting fair decked out of it, right? Like some of the matchups you can run into are not great. You can fall victim to snap and retreats like if you have bad snap and retreat discipline with a deck like this, you will end up vomiting 1 cube slowly at a time, 1 cube extra because you stayed on a 2-cuber, that kind of stuff. This kind of deck is extremely skill testing because the margins are quite thin. Even in the games that you win, you're not dominating them. Your margins are small. And you have to keep that in mind when you play a deck like this because the power is there and the consistency is there, but you never get to take a turn off and just say, oh, well, I win. Who cares what they do? You always have to care what they do. You need to think about their range constantly. This is a deck that cares deeply about what its opponent is doing, and you need to care about that too if you're going to play it. Pile deck number 2 comes from Roram. This is one of the most piley piles to have ever piled. I really don't know how to say this in any other terms, but this is perhaps the most tech slop has ever gotten. Incredible amounts of slop are being poured onto your board right now. This is the Sloppy Joe deck. We're interacting with you in specifically ways that blow your stuff up or prevent it from working. That is the entirety of this. We're not even doing the reactive stuff. There's no like, oh, Shang-Chi inch. You don't get a turn of having a 10 power guy. If you get the 10 power guy down, you get it. But none of your cards have text, and a lot of them don't exist. And that's really the idea with a deck like this. There's a lot of cards and decks in Marvel Snap that key off of the text of their cards. I know that sounds like a really obvious thing, but it is more prominent in a metagame like this, driven by Invisible Woman First Steps, Victoria Hand, things like that. Cards that need to be on the board to have their effects and sometimes sit there on the board. So you blow them up. You blow up Athena with Lady Deathstrike. You blow up a Havoc with Lady Deathstrike. You blow up a Victoria Hand with Lady Deathstrike. You Red Guardian a Victoria Hand. You Red Guardian an Invisible Woman First Steps. You see where this is going, right? And of course, we have the Merlin Werewolf package as the primary point generator and the Hood Misery package as the secondary. A lot of good stuff going on here. Guido hit 4th place in the Golden Gauntlet with a much more ceiling focused on deck. To me, this looks like a deck that is very specifically attempting to beat the crap out of Invisible Woman First Steps decks. And the way it's trying to do this is by trying to play 2 Iron Men, and sometimes more than 2 Iron Men, thanks to Moonstone and Mystique's interaction. The idea here is basically, okay, there's a lot of people who aren't really going to be interacting with me. They're going to be doing Invisible Woman First Step stuff. They're going to be doing things that build their own board high, and I'm just going to go taller than them. And I'm going to do that while playing a semi-fair mid-range game, which you can with the 2 Captain Americas. Or, alternatively, just putting way too many points on the board for anyone to actually deal with. This deck is taking massive advantage of the fact that we've talked about literally no decks so far that run the card Enchantress. She's just not around. And this deck gets to exist because of it. Literally, like, she's not around. This is, we talked about how it's a nadir for Shang-Chi. It's a real nadir for Enchantress. And that is because the targets that these cards normally have are out of the metagame, which means right now, once people have realized, oh, my Enchantress isn't doing a lot. Oh, it's not doing amazing. Let's get other cards in here. This is the time to play this before they get their Enchantresses back in the deck. Speaking of extremely boring tech that has Enchantress in it, I tried taking Enchantress out and playing Stardust because it's like, new card, let's try it. Don't do that. It's worse. It just is. Like, you are more likely to run into things that Enchantress is relevant against than you are that Stardust right now. And that sucks. It's unfortunate. But you can make the swap if you're running into a lot of, let's say, Redshift Ghost Rider, Hela, Nimrod, although frankly, the release of Stardust has largely caused people to not play a lot of Hela and Nimrod, which is sort of like, why am I bothering to do it if just the existence of the card is forcing these people off these decks anyway? I think Sera's a very fine deck. There's nothing I can say that's like, oh, this is a wrong decision to play Sera. I just think there's probably other decks that are a little bit higher up. If you want to play Redshift, I believe this is the best list, and I think it's the best list in large part because of the Juggernaut and Luna Snow. Juggernaut and Luna Snow mean that you can have Final Turn, Juggernaut, and either the card from the Black Knight, which would cost 4, or the card from the Ghost Rider, which is also 4. That kind of power output, big guy plus Juggernaut, is sort of the prerequisite to compete in a metagame like this. This deck also has a lot of genuine power in it in terms of the ability to get a bunch of discounts down. There's not a ton of Mobius here. There was a Mobius in the first deck in the video. I mentioned he was a bit of a flex spot. I don't really consider him mandatory, but if you assume people are just going to copy that deck because it did very well, you might want to be a little bit more concerned with taking a deck like this, which is sort of predicated on those discounts to some degree. It's part of why I like Luna Snow. It allows you to get your points out there, even in the world where you're getting Mobius and your Quinjet isn't doing anything. The deck has a lot of power output. It can do really surprising things. There are big stats plus Juggernaut plays. It's very hard for a deck that can leverage that stuff properly to actively be bad. This is like low-key a decent time to play Mr. Negative. It can be, at least. There are 2 things that make it good and 1 thing that makes it bad. Thing 1 that makes it good, not a lot of Mobius running around right now. We talked about that a little bit already. Thing 2 that makes it good, being able to go stats for stats is a viable strategy in this current metagame. Thing that makes it bad, the Invisible Woman deck just doesn't run any ongoings or on reveals, which means that unless you're doing your Iron Man stuff, you're kind of screwed in that matchup. Like, Gore's going to be a pretty big dude, but he's going to be like 12 power. And it's like, okay, well, if they do their combo, they have more than that, right? And Invisible Woman is a deck that doesn't run any interaction with magic, but also Invisible Woman is a deck that has its own combo. And so giving them that extra turn kind of makes them more consistent. Largely, the issue is one of ceilings. Like, this is a deck that can lose to Invisible in a 7-turn game. Right stuff in the right order, and that's a lot dependent on what you draw before. That's an awkward spot to be in, to the point that I almost wonder if it might want to go for a higher ceiling build with stuff like Arnim Zola in order to make sure that that matchup gets back in the direction that you want it to be in. This deck top 16s, and I think a lot of that is down to the fact that Shang-Chi is really actually quite bad right now, and I think they probably just dodged a bunch of Shang-Chis and got into the bracket where everyone realized Shang-Chi was bad, and they punished the people who were like smart enough to be like, Shang-Chi's bad, I'm not bringing him, with a deck that like gets a bunch of giant dudes on the board very early. I just wanted to shout out Big Boy Gishath, because this is the deck that top 16 the Golden Gauntlet. I would never have expected this in a million years. Huge shout out to anything like this. This is almost a Husky Puppies style deck where it's just like, here's my dudes, check out my points. I'm playing Hela right now. It's honestly very similar to Hela. It's just without getting like Mondo clapped by Stardust. And I kind of wonder if that was the idea here. Arishem, as usual, a little bit better in tournaments than on ladder because of the hidden information aspect of the card. This list, I believe, top 16, maybe top 8, I want to say. And I think it's really cool. And I think it's interesting how Arishem continues to show weaponize that not misinformation, but and Arishem, I also think you're probably going to want to play something closer to this as opposed to doing the Thanos stuff, because without the Thanos that just starts in your hand, I'm just not sure there's enough upside to it. And this is just like the classic, going back to the classic version of Arishem, playing the most powerful cards you can possibly play. Everything in here is really good, really strong, really impactful, can change a game depending on how you play it. And I think that that is largely the deck building strategy that I would take for Arishem right now. This card is in a similar vein to Cerebro here for me, which is not to say it's bad or anything like that. It's just like sometimes these decks just sort of disappear because they're boring rather than because they're not particularly. I think both Discard and Cerebro are very, very functional. It's just they're not particularly exciting, and they do things that are fairly similar to decks that are particularly exciting. People are exploring other ceiling decks or trying to counter other things right now. But both of them can just compete with basically anything that ever happens on numbers when they draw right, and that is a very reasonable place to be. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.